Welcome back to the Pease Podcast, the show where we delve into the captivating world of Lytton's local legends. I'm your host, Joan Pease, and I proudly serve as your state member for Lytton. In this podcast, we celebrate the rich tapestry of our community by highlighting the extraordinary stories of individuals, community groups and businesses who make Lytton the really wonderful place that it is to call home. So from historic figures to contemporary heroes, we'll explore the diverse talents and remarkable achievements that have shaped Lytton's identity. In each episode, we uncover untold tales and remarkable contributions of those who make a positive impact on our Bayside and even further afield. And in today's episode, I'm really thrilled to have with us today Captain Ross Nicholls. Now, Ross is the president of Mission to Seafarers Brisbane, and he's a stalwart of the maritime industry, a highly experienced captain and a strong advocate for the wellbeing of seafarers. I'll be talking with Ross today about his experience of working in the maritime industry, the places he's travelled, the jobs he's worked on, and how he came to be involved in the Mission to Seafarers, including, and we're going to hear a fair bit about that today, the great work of Mission to Seafarers, and also how the community can get involved. So sit back and relax and join us as we embrace on this exciting adventure of celebrating Lytton's local legends. So welcome, Ross.
Thanks very much, Joan.
It's great to have you.
Yeah, great to be here. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your background, Ross.
Okay, well, I'm from the maritime industry. Left school, went to sea in the maritime industry, studied, got my qualifications and then sort of worked on board ships probably for about 14, 15 years after I left school, rising to the dizzy ranks, but great occupation for a young person. It's just an adventurous lifestyle.
So when you say you worked up the ranks of what? What work did you actually do?
I was actually a navigating officer. You know, that was broken down into various categories on board life, and I was a navigating or a deck officer, which they called back in the. So our responsibilities were navigating ships, loading and unloading cargo, help managing the crew on board, and occasionally entertainment officers as well. Because life on board ships in those days, like we didn't have mobile phones, there was no emails, there was no communication pretty much with the outside world, and we had a radio operator. And the radio operator, if you wanted to contact home, you had to send a telex or a telegram. Or, so if you could make a phone call, if you're in range or you had the right reception, you would place a phone call, a very crackly phone call, to loved ones, back home in the country. So,
and that's how they would have reached you as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So communication was pretty sparse back in those days, not compared to now.
No, and so you have experiences being on board a ship.
Yeah.
How long were the stints that you were out on sea
Yeah,
for?
well, look, I was thinking about that the other day. We're talking about seafarers, and we will talk about them later. But even back then, in the 1980s, we had you would do 7 months away from home and maybe 3 to 4 at home. That was probably the longest I would do, and the shortest would probably be maybe 3 months away and maybe 2 months at home.
That's a very hard life, isn't it?
Look, it is a pretty hard life. Absolutely. I think people don't look, especially in today's world. Back in those days, we accepted that we were going away, and communications at the time was, as I just described, but also when you got to port, there was a Telstra or a Telecom back in the day box somewhere in the distance. And I recall, you get into port and you're so excited, you wanted to ring home. And
I can imagine.
You saved every single 20-cent piece you had, and you walked to the phone box, that might be a couple of Ks. And I still remember this day. I'd go home and I'd make a phone call, and there was no one there. Oh. You're heartbroken because you thought, well, I've been off the air for like a month, and I wanted just to say hello and speak. So I remember one of the early Christmases, I bought an answering machine for home, so at least I could actually leave a message. Yeah, but that was communication back in the day. So you're away for a long stretch, and communication was very, very intermittent.
And that applies to all seafarers, I suppose.
It does. Look, and today is not significantly different, I have to say. There's around about 70,000 trading ships, about 1.5 million commercial seafarers. At any one time, there's probably about 1 million on ships at sea.
Wow.
25% of those ships, so 25% of the million, so only 250,000 might have connectivity at home. They might actually have probably not Wi-Fi in their cabin, but they would probably have it somewhere on board the ship that they can go and they can communicate. That would be provided free. There's probably another 10 to 15% that actually would pay for their Wi-Fi, and I'm talking about they might get 500 megabytes for $40, and you and I think, well, that's pretty poor, and that's right. And when your average daily wage is $70 US, $40 you pay, half your daily wage goes in.
Goes to that.
Yeah. So, and then you've got the other percentage of seafarers who have no communication. They wait until they get into port, and then they have to go to a seafarer centre, and hopefully the seafarer centre has Wi-Fi and means of connecting with home. And in Brisbane we do. We have free Wi-Fi. And we, for a reduced cost, we sell phone cards that they can recharge, and they can connect with their families again. So they're very sought after items when they visit.
So tell me a little bit about seafarers. Mission to seafarers.
Mission to seafarers. Well, look, I'd love to speak specifically about Brisbane. It's 1892.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean it's been going 130 odd years.
That's amazing.
In the Port of Brisbane.
In the Port of Brisbane itself?
In the Port of Brisbane itself, yeah.
Goodness me.
So the Port of Brisbane back in the day was situated right up in the centre of the city, and
yes.
Eagle Street and Mary Street wharves, et cetera, and even further up, at South Bank, they used to take ships up there and unload them. So it was commenced by a lady who was part of the Anglican Church, and so the genesis of the charity was actually the Anglican Church. It started in the UK, but in Australia it was a lady who was an Anglican, and she thought, how can all these people on board ships have nothing? They have very, very little, no connectivity at all. You can imagine back in 1800s, no welfare support, no friendship, no et cetera, et cetera. Life was really, really harsh back in those days. And she actually invited people to her home in Figtree Pocket. And then basically as the port has morphed its way from the city all the way out now predominantly to the Fisherman's Island precinct in the Port of Brisbane, so has the Seafaring Centre. And it's become, I won't say more commercial, but it's become more established, more structured. So today we moved back in the late 80s to a facility on Fisherman's Island. And we have now what I would probably call, most people could recognise as a social club. But if you take Winnimanning Leagues Club and just bring it down on a smaller scale, you've got a Seafarers Centre predominantly, and all actually specifically built for seafarers.
So that's amazing. So for the seafarers who are out on the water, moving around all of the cargo that we make use of here in Australia or exporting from Australia, when they come to a port, not always do they have anywhere to go, I take it. Does every port have a facility or somewhere for them to go?
Well, to answer your question, the answer is no, not every port does. But Australia is blessed. We have around about 28, and we've got a lot of ports. We have about 28 seafarer centres in a range of ports. All the capital cities, some of the very large export ports, Queensland's well blessed. We have up the coast, up to Townsville. But they don't always have access. That's the other thing. So, for example, our port, Brisbane's quite an elongated port. We've got two sides of the river. We've got wharves. We've got about 27, 28 wharves in Brisbane. So it's quite a dynamic port. Obviously Queensland's largest multi-cargo port. And so we have around about 70 to 80,000 seafarers per year come into Brisbane, the Port of Brisbane, on ships.
That's amazing.
It's a large number. The sad reality is, prior to COVID, we used to see about 15,000 a year, and now we're seeing about 6. So the number of ships hasn't reduced, and the number of seafarers hasn't reduced. There's been quite a social change because of the pandemic, the way it's reacted. And seafarers, most people probably wouldn't realise, we felt sorry that we were restricted to our houses, but we could still go to the shops, etc. And get things delivered. Well, seafarers were restricted to their ships
and couldn't.
For 13 months, something like that, 12, 13 months.
And I know that you stepped up to that and were getting deliveries taken to the vessels.
Absolutely, yeah. That actually saved us financially. We actually put together an online store, and so we actually created that Amazon for the seafarers, delivering products to seafarers, and supporting the thousands of seafarers that went through our hotels in Brisbane. Brisbane, Queensland was actually a shining light. It got recognition around the world for the way that we treated seafarers here. We actually looked after them. We facilitated their transport to and from ships, to and from their homes. It was magnificent. It didn't really get the recognition that it probably deserved back in the day.
It really is amazing, the work that you do, and people kind of forget about the seafarers and what they do. So what is a seafarer?
Well, great question. A seafarer is somebody who actually works on board a ship for their job. And look, a lot of people would recognise people on cruise ships because it's a great way to spend some holiday time. But underneath the surface, the reality is a seafarer is somebody that is on a commercial trading ship. It's a person that's working on there for their job. And there's a hierarchy of jobs on board. You've obviously got the captain, which everybody thinks about. The captain and the chief engineer who ensures the machinery is maintained and operational so the ship can, 365 days a year can actually ply its trade. From the people that support that, they've got the engineering officers, the deck officers who they look after the navigation and the loading and unloading of the cargoes. Then you've got the various people that support those, and the larger volume of people on board a ship is in that category. So they call them able seamen or integrated ratings and oilers and greasers. So they're maintaining the ship. They're doing the maintenance. They're doing the storing. They're doing the cleaning. They're doing the cooking. You've got cooks on board, obviously, and people that support those people again. So there's around about 25 on average per vessel. Yeah. So there's a reasonable number. I think one of the interesting things of a seafarer's life today, like the predominant seafaring nations or those that provide seafarers to ships these days are the Philippines, India, China, and then to a lesser degree some other smaller Asian countries.
Yeah, I understand the Solomons has a fairly big contribution.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And the Pacific Island nations are actually a great source of labour because the water's in their blood. A lot of these smaller island nations don't have a means of supporting themselves, so they're seafarers.
Their economy.
That's right, that's their economy. And some of them were devastated during COVID because they couldn't travel. So that's their economy. So that's what the seafarer does. They actually get the ship from A to B. And to put it into context, we've got without trade. I'll go back a step. We all have seen a truck, and there's a sticker on the back of the truck, and it says, "Without trucks, Australia stops." I'll just go one step further. Most of those trucks are carrying cargo off ships. So without ships, Australia definitely stops. Like nothing will happen. Our fuel, our diesel, our petrol, our jet fuel, that's all imported. That comes in on ships. Our coal, our grains, our cattle goes out on ships. Bunnings have about 49,000 items on their shelves, and probably 48,895 of them come in on a ship and get stored in the distribution centre down here at Lytton. So everything moves, clothing, you name it, it comes in on ships. And so these people are the ones that get the ships from A to B around the world safely and on time, and then load it and unload it and turn it around and keep it going.
And it's amazing because it's 7 days a week, 24 hours a day.
It is.
So that'd be constant shift work for those involved.
Yeah.
And what sort of conditions do the seafarers live on?
Yeah, well, it's a good one. It's quite a variety of conditions, and that sounds a bit of an odd response, but I'll explain. There's, as you and I would think, like a business is a business, but there are multiple shipping companies that operate multiple ships. And you have from the 5-star ship operators right down to let's say the 1-star ship operators. And we've got a wonderful relationship with the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, who oversee the safety of shipping operating in Australia. And they often detain ships. And they detain ships on the basis that there's something fundamentally wrong with the operation on board. And that could be mechanical, it could be administrative, or it could be what we call like a seafarer-related issue. And I'll give you an example of a seafarer. So a good ship would have cooks that cook wonderful meals. They're constantly replenishing food. They've got good quality food that's sourced possibly in Australia or Singapore, wherever it might be, and everybody's happy. They're well fed, well looked after. They've got internet, etc., and they feel like this job's not so much of a challenge. So that's that end of the spectrum. To the other end of the spectrum, where you've got the 1-star ship operator. And we've had this recently where the only thing that was actually in the ship's provision was rice. They had no fresh food. This is in Brisbane in 2023. They had rice on board. So we facilitated getting the crew off. We helped them change money because they've all got US dollars. And we took them to the Wynnum Plaza and they bought enough food for 7 days for 25 people to get them to their next port, where they could replenish again and slowly build their stocks up. So that's an example of how such a variety that we also know that ships are often, the seconds of food is palmed off to ships. So, for example, I won't name names because it's not about that, but we all know that you can get top quality food and then you can get varying grades. Well, ships are often used to get rid of the varying grades because they will eat anything as they need to. So there's a really large variety. And look, a funny story, anecdotal story is lots of ships are manned with multiple different nationalities. So I mentioned the key nationalities before, but it is not unusual today because a ship owner is trying to keep their costs down. So they will source labour from the cheapest countries they can possibly source them from. And so you have a range of countries on board, but you can sometimes have 8 nationalities in 25 people. So you can just imagine now, it's easy for us to cook at home, isn't it?
That's right.
We're just going to all eat the same food. But 8 different nationalities, and the cook might be Filipino, and you might have Russian, Ukrainian, Romanian, Bulgarian, Myanmar, China, Philippines, India, and a Solomon Islander on board. And that wouldn't be unusual to talk about that range of mix of seafarers. So then how do you cook for all those people? How do you satisfy all those people? Not easy.
No.
There's lovers of rice, there's lovers of potatoes, there's lovers of meat. There's, don't turn around and say, look, I'm a vegan or a vegetarian or a pescatarian or whatever it might be, because I'm sorry, mate, that's what you're getting.
Yes, it's a different world.
Absolutely.
And one that many of us would not even think about or consider what it means to be a seafarer. Once we might get in our new car that's come off one of the boats that's come in through the Port of Brisbane, not even thinking about those seafarers that have made sure that vehicle arrives here safely.
That's right, yeah.
So it's to be commended, the work that the Mission to Seafarers does out there. So what happens out at the centre at the Port of Brisbane?
Yeah, well, just referring to I mentioned it was a social club. I mean, basically we provide a facility where they can come off the ship. As you mentioned, they're fatigued, they're shift workers, they lack of communication, meals might not be to their liking, as we're just talking about food, and we provide a home away from home. So we provide them with social facilities. We have pool tables, table tennis. We have televisions. We have games. So that if they're into PlayStation or Xbox, etc., we have those sorts of games. We have musical instruments. It's just amazing to see somebody from Myanmar who comes over and he picks up a guitar and starts singing, and the whole of the Seafarers Centre stops and turns. And there's this one person in this remote job, miles from home, that can't even speak very much English, and they start singing in this beautiful voice. So we have pianos, we have an art table. It's quite interesting to see how many are creative. You would think, you don't think about that because they're operating a ship, and they come down and they do this fantastic drawing, just a sketch of something that they've thought about or whatever it might be. We have a little coffee shop. We have books, so we've got a library. We have a second-hand clothing, which is so vital. I mean, some of them join in their summer, and they've got their summer clothes from northern Philippines, which is, tropical, and their next port of call is Brisbane. They join in Brisbane, and the next port is North China, and it might be winter. And they go, oh, wow. And so we've got, jackets and beanies and gloves. I do have to say we've got some wonderful support networks out there that provide us knit. And,
I've seen the great work of the people doing the knitting for the seafarers. And that's interesting. So the companies that these people work for, they're not provided with the uniform?
Most of them, no. So some of those companies I was mentioned before, the five-star companies, they might provide them with a uniform, like a pair of overalls with the brand and their name, etc., and their rank. And right through to they bring their own jeans and T-shirt and whatever it might be, and boots.
And safety equipment.
And safety equipment, yeah. So there is a real breadth of variation between what's provided.
So out at the centre, do you you have a bus or something that can go and pick up the seafarers from their vessels?
Yeah, we do. We have a couple of buses, just small buses, which you only need a driver's licence. So a car driver's licence is all that we would need from somebody to operate the bus. And it's pretty much on demand that we get called from the ship, or the security guards. So there is a process for seafarers coming on and off the ship. It's a maritime security zone, so they can't just walk on and off, nor can we. You have to have a special card. But on demand, we get contacted by security. We come out and we pick up seafarers. 99% of the time, there's a big smiling face meeting you because they're just so glad to be hopping in the bus. And we take them back to the Seafarers Centre. We do have the ability to change limited amounts of money there, so we can actually help them break $100 US note so they can go shopping. I would say now, post-COVID, that we take the majority of people to the Wynnum Plaza. And, we were taking around about 14,000 prior to COVID there. We're taking nearly all of the 6,000 that come ashore at the moment, and the numbers are growing. They want to go to the plaza. And going back to the food again, their eyes light up when we come around the corner onto Wynnum Road and there's a KFC or there's a Hungry Jack's or McDonald's. That beats that curry that I've been eating for the last months.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
It's amazing what you do out there. I've had the pleasure of popping out to the Seafarers Centre many times, and it's really great, the volunteers that are out there. And I understand that people can volunteer.
Absolutely, Joan. Look, we would not survive without volunteers. We've got a couple of wonderful staff members out there, Heather and Jules, and they're our they keep the centre running. Though structurally, they're there to make sure that we can operate for the 5 days a week we're operating at the moment. But the lifeblood is the volunteers, because we probably need a minimum of 3 volunteers a day to be able to operate the buses. It's both buses, and we've got a small shop there, and the small shop needs somebody there to be obviously serving, stocking, communicating, and we've got a small bar as well, so need people to operate that. With our clothing, we need people to obviously stock shelves and hang clothing and help the seafarers, because some of them struggle with English, and so they're trying to communicate as to what they need and want. So interacting with seafarers, operating buses, having some great chats are all part of a volunteer's role. And when I say great chats, there's nothing better than, I'm a family man and I know you're a family woman, that once they get their phone card in and they've got connection with home again, or they've got the Wi-Fi and they're connecting with home, and all of a sudden you can hear kids saying hi to their parent, and they're giggling and they're walking around showing them around the centre, and they're bringing them and showing us, and we're saying hi to their kids, and there's this little kids waving from all those thousands of miles away. It just brings joy to you.
Yeah. What an amazing way of life. I mean, you've lived it.
Yeah.
And so you know firsthand how lovely that you're giving back, because you're a volunteer with the Seafarers.
Yeah,
so great work.
Yeah.
How can people volunteer?
Well, look, Jules is great on our social media, and I do a lot of the social media as well, but we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Google, and so any of those methods. We've got our phone number up on our Google and our Facebook pages as well. We're open Monday to Friday. We'd love to either see people or respond to any direct messages or phone calls, etc. We'd love to hear from anybody that's even thinking about volunteering or thinking about, I'd love to give back in one way, shape or form. Then we're available. And it's rewarding insofar as there's lots of ways to be rewarded, but the people that we're dealing with are so humble. And the smallest little thing that you do, we take for granted, if we were to do things. But they don't take it for granted. They are so delighted when you do something very tiny for them. Even driving them to the shops, the buses. Even taking them to the train station to help them get a train because some want to go on the Ferris wheel. I've seen the Ferris wheel in the city at South Bank. And take them to the train station, which we take for granted, but they are so excited. We get given gifts for doing things like taking them to the train station. It might be a bar of chocolate, but they've expended their own
money to do that. Yeah. And money would not particularly be plentiful for some of these people.
No, definitely not. No, that's definitely not plentiful.
They would be working to send the money back home to their families, many of them.
Yeah. And I look at a very statistic that most people get blown away by is like the average Filipino seafarer can support up to, and generally does support up to 20 people on the one salary. So they actually feel beholden to work away to earn that salary because they've got their family, their immediate family, they've got their extended family, they've got people in the village, they might have mum and dad, and they feel as though if they don't complete their contract, they're letting all these people down.
And would the average wage be?
The average wage is probably, in US dollars, is close to about $800 a month.
It's not a lot of money.
It's not a lot of money, yeah.
To be away from your family and to have limited access to services.
That's right,
Do the seafarers have to pay for their accommodation on the vessel?
Not on board, no. But look, I mentioned the one-star ship owners. It happens. Look, it's the International Transport Federation workers are a fantastic organisation that look after the contractual agreement side of the seafarers' lives, whereas we look after more of their well-being and their spiritual and their day-to-day needs. They've recovered in Australia on ships that have come to Australia around about $37 million of wages that were being withheld.
Oh, dear.
Or they were getting a percentage of their wage and the other percentage was going somewhere else.
Yeah, and these people are already vulnerable. They're being, abused. That's very sad to take advantage of vulnerable people who are desperate just to provide for their family.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. You do amazing work. It is always lovely to catch up with you,
Ross.
It's
a pleasure, Jane.
Really lovely to come out to the centre as well.
Yeah.
So if you are interested in volunteering, I would really encourage you to do that. It's a beautiful venue. And they're beautiful people. As you can see, Ross is a very nice person to talk to. So, Ross, thank you. Do you have any you've had an amazing career yourself?
Yeah, well, I have had an amazing career. But I was a marine pilot in the Port of Brisbane. And that was just
wow.
Yeah, and that spurred me on. Because up until that time, I was a little bit one step back from the seafaring farers, and that brought me close to the seafarers again. And I actually get to spend, an average ship was about 4.5 hours from the time we got on off the coast of Mooloolaba to the time we berthed in Brisbane. And I would establish some pretty amazing rapport. I had invitations to Canada and India and come and stay with their families. I've met the first Indian woman captain. I've met some amazing people and all through that job, and that really inspired me to actually connect with the Seafarers Centre, meet some of these people and help them as much as I can. And I've been there 10 years this year. I've been the president for 5 and I'm just inspired to keep keeping on because I get so much back personally from coming down and working. So I would encourage people who are thinking about giving back to the community and in our area, we have lots of wonderful charities and groups, but we're one that's a little bit different. We're a little bit more removed, but we're only 10, 12 minutes from Wynnum, and you get to meet with a whole range of international seafarers who've got a range of interesting stories. So it's a great place to connect with other people less fortunate than ourselves.
Can I just ask you to perhaps explain to the listeners what a marine pilot does?
Yeah, well, I guess marine pilot, a lot of people, when I said I'm a pilot, people, who do you fly for?
Yeah.
And I usually say Qantas, because it's easier than explaining what a marine pilot does. But basically, ships are getting bigger, and most people would have seen there was a ship that went aground in the Suez Canal, the Evergreen ship, and caused a massive supply chain issues. There was a whole range of, there was potential oil spill, etc. And for those who remember the Pacific Adventurer that had that oil spill off the coast of Queensland, well, that Pacific Adventurer spilled about 10% of the actual oil that's on most ships, excluding the oil tankers, which are carrying maybe 150, 160,000 tonnes. So the potential for a catastrophic incident from a ship could be high, and because the people that are actually operating the ships actually aren't familiar with the area. So they're familiar with their home port or familiar with the open ocean. But when it comes down to the Port of Brisbane or Gladstone or wherever it may be, whichever port, you have specialists who are familiar with the area, the channels, the tides, the weather, the wharves, the river. I mean, the Brisbane River has its own challenges. And so a marine pilot's a specialist that goes on board the ship basically to protect that area from a catastrophic shipping incident, which would have devastating effect on our local environment. And that's what they do. So we navigate the ship, we manoeuvre it in the river, or whether we're leaving or arriving, and we get the safe passage of the ship. So we facilitate the trade safely, we get the ship in and out safely, and everybody's happy. That's the plan. Yeah, it's from Marine Pilots.
Yes, that's fascinating work.
Yeah.
Well, good on you. Thank you so much for coming in today, Ross.
Yeah,
it was
pleasure.
really great. And I really do want to thank all of the volunteers that do the great work out at Mission to Seafarers because it's such an important part of our life.
It is.
Without people looking after those seafarers who, for all intents and purposes, no one would even gives them a thought. So thank you very much.
No, my pleasure, Jane. Thank you very
really
much
lovely.
for having me.
So thank you very much for coming. So thank you for joining us today in this captivating journey through Lytton's local legends. I hope that you've enjoyed the insightful conversation that we had with Captain Ross Nicholls and have gained a deeper understanding of the experiences of seafaring, being a captain and, importantly, being an advocate for seafarers as well as being a marine pilot. If you've liked this episode, make sure that you subscribe to the Pease Podcast so that you never miss the opportunity to discover more captivating stories of the extraordinary individuals and organisations that make Lytton the vibrant place that it is today. We'd love to hear your feedback and suggestions for future episodes, so feel free to reach out to us on my social media or through my website. And remember, it's through your engagement that keeps this podcast alive and thriving. Join us again next time as we continue our mission of celebrating the unsung heroes, the trailblazers and the fascinating stories that make Lytton a truly special place to call home. Until then, stay curious, stay inspired and keep celebrating the legends in our Bayside. And if you're interested in volunteering, make sure that you reach out to Mission to Seafarers. It would be very rewarding. I know that you will love it. So this is Joan Pease, your host, signing off.